Right, can I ask Catherine and Kate to come back onto the stage, please? And we're going to do 10 or 15 minutes of questions. Now, Kate will get very angry if there are no questions. So I'm seriously hoping that we've got some questions. There must be a question. Okay. Yes, no? Yes. Thank you.
I'm really interested in the recruitment of young people and how to attract them. As an organisation, we don't. Certainly not within prisons. And even for some junior vacancies, we're not getting any applications from younger people. And I just wondered whether there's anything generally we could do more than we are.
Okay, you can all have a go at that. So let's start with Laura Jane.
So one of the things that we see to be most effective when working with young people is to recruit locally, is to build relationships up with the organisations that are working with young people on the ground. So particularly the Job Centre Plus service, they have a really good youth engagement team in many, many job centres, but also organisations like Talent Match or Groundworks and some of these bigger charities are working with young people on pre-employment programmes. So they're desperately looking for opportunities for their young people who are progressing. So depending on your location, you will find 10 to 15 youth organisations and charities running pre-employment programmes for young people in that area. So it's about actually physical contact. It's about meeting those young people. It's about talking to their youth workers, giving them an experience day within your organisation so they can overcome kind of nerves and concerns about what that might look like. And then you'll find that that's kind of a much more engaged process than online job applications and sifting. There are just so many places for young people to look. It's actually really overwhelming.
Kate, do you have a view on that?
Hiya. So I guess the marketeer in me is saying there's the routes that you use, which is as much face-to-face conversation as possible, and giving people experiential, what your brand is like, to work for what your organisation is like, but also the tone of voice, the messaging, the images that you use. I think it was something that, is it Chris, the lad from IBM, said earlier, and actually yourselves, without stock imagery. I say to all my clients, get rid of all your stock imagery, get rid of all of your posh language. We can tell I don't use a lot of that, and talk in plain English and make it simple. And I think that's something that often there can be great opportunities that get lost in jargon and lingo and, to be honest, boring brands and positioned in a really dull way. And then providers and employers get frustrated that they've got these great, what they think is great opportunities, but it's not being positioned appropriately. So you've got to look across the whole spectrum to get somebody interested.
Thank you. And before I answer this, I just want to say that I also like gin, just on the record here.
Can somebody pop out to the offline?
Yeah, I think there is a need. I wanted to talk about actually our own responsibility actually in the sector for making sure that we play our role in raising aspirations among young people, and actually the damage we sometimes do in the system for not doing that. And I'm really minded of some work we've just recently done on the SEND programme that I was talking about, of listening to young people who have special educational needs and disabilities, who were 16, 17, and who have come from schools and were told they would never amount to anything. And if you are told that, that's what you will begin to believe, and you will not put yourself forward, you will not apply for things, etc. And thankfully, they've gone into the further education system, and that has completely changed. And they are young people now who are studying at level 2, level 3. Some of them are elected officers for the whole of their peer groups as national, in the students' union. So they're not only just studying, but they're actually participating and doing amazing things. And it's all about, I think, that attitude that we have to support and build confidence. It kind of goes also back to the well-being and mental health thing, is that it's not just about recognising when young people have problems, it's also about building that kind of confidence and resilience and self-esteem in young people, and we need to do that all the time, and we need to do that in a way throughout all of our organisations.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Any more questions?
I'd like to ask a very general question. I'm just really aware of some of what happens globally, education-wise. And Laura Jane, you mentioned your son trying to make choices around GCSEs. We have a disconnect between school, FE, HE, employers in terms of what is it we're looking for. There's also, in our case, in the case of engineering, I'm looking here at Steve as well, we know that there's a disconnect in terms of what happens at schools around advice and the fact that children give up on STEM very early on. And I think this is all linked as well to mental health in terms of all these choices that children are made to go through at the age of 14, 16, etc. Have any of you thought about the possibility of looking at different structures for our education system? So if I compare our education system to some systems across Europe maybe, which are not too different culturally from us, they don't require so many choices. You go through pathways and programs that are much broader. So, for instance, in certain countries, you continue learning maths unless you are specifically moving well away from science. But most people learn science, for example.
So your question again?
So my question is, have you looked at different structures? Have you ever, in terms of your work, proposed different educational structures that might support things like youth employment, mental health? What does the ETF do around that?
Okay, I was going to say let's start with Catherine, but you two won't get off the hook, so you better be thinking.
Okay. We're a government-funded organisation, so obviously that kind of gives it a slightly different. No, but having said that, obviously, as indeed the government would do themselves, and we would do, is you will always look to where there is good examples and good practice, etc. Personally, I do think that, and this is a personal view, not one of the ETF. I do think that we are possibly forcing young people to make decisions that actually isn't good for mental health, that it does put a strain on young people, but actually when we think about the future of the labour market, is also not really a sensible thing to do when actually, young people now are going to have to work to their 70s. There are jobs, most jobs that they'll be doing then have not even been thought of, not even think. So we need to kind of keep young people's education open. One of the things I also would say, and this is something that I am passionate about, is that actually I think we need to invest more in, and this again is my view, invest more in adult learning. And I think we have, and talking about social mobility and young people having access to role models in their own family, is that so many people missed out the first time round and they need to have that second chance. And that would do such a massive thing to the mental health of young people whose parents are engaged and actually to social mobility. So I think my sense is we need to rethink for the future and for fairness aspects of our education system. I do need a gin now, by the way.
I'm going to Kate next, if I may.
Okay.
So I guess I have got an angle for that actually, which I didn't think I did have when you first asked. It's well known that the more choices you give to somebody, the harder it is to make a choice. And if you think about going to a restaurant, you can have a list of 200 meals to choose from. Is harder to choose than it is if you have 4. And the restaurant that has 4 sells more food than the restaurant that has 200. And actually, if I analyse that too with regards to mental health, we see lots of directory of services, of mental health services, by local authorities, CCGs, other providers, and actually what they're trying to do is give you all the information so you can be what they believe is as informed as possible. Actually, when we talked to service users about what they expect and experience, particularly expect from mental health services, it was about clarity and it was about ease of access to information, and actually the choices not being made for them, but it being very, very clear. And so unlike lots of the kind of council-run platforms that we see around mental health, and when I speak to people, they say, oh, we've got one, or our school's got one. Actually, we're trying to manage that flow of information much better and think about that customer journey so that you aren't overwhelmed and you actually don't have visibility of everything all at one point, because especially with the nature of the person who might be using the platform. So I always say I'm the lowest common denominator in the room, and so if I can get it, then anyone can. And so going through with regards to mental health, and I apply this to kind of journey mapping with apprenticeships, if you can keep it simple and make it very clear from the beginning, then it's often more successful. You don't have the paranoia of trying to force lots of information on people. That's probably the only angle I've got with that.
Thank you. And Laura Jane?
I think given that we're all still reeling from apprenticeship levy, T-levels and, education excellence white papers, I think perhaps we shouldn't reinvent education for a little while. We can't cope. We can't cope as the system keeps changing, and actually our teaching staff can't cope, our schools can't cope. So I don't think the answer is to reignite an education system or recreate an education system. What I think we need is quality. I think we need to kind of take a breath now and ensure that every one of these reforms that's coming through is done well, is supported, is funded properly, and that during that process we recognise the importance of not letting our young people slip through the net. I have huge fear that we're going to see many, many more young people fall through the net in the coming months and years as this new education reform changes and there's no local support service for them, funded. But I think there is some great policy coming, dare I say it. I think if I look forward to when my 9-year-old finally finishes her education, I think she'll probably be all right. Our ambassador that's with us today is the first victim of the GCSE changes from 1 to 9. And we've got employers that don't understand what those changes mean. We've got to let this settle, and we've got to ensure the quality support is there. And I think if that's done, we might have an education system that we can all be very proud of. We have to work together to achieve that and support the system to adapt to the changes, though. And I think the second point about the careers information, I think we too often are relying on adults to support young people to make decisions. They're making decisions for the young people. I've said to my children, don't tell me what you want to be when you grow up. What I'm going to do is show you all the world and tell you that you can be anything you want to be. You don't have to they could have 100 different choices at 12 and 13 and 14. It's crazy to think that children, we go up to our nieces and our nephews and say, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Crikey, there's probably half the people in the room earlier didn't know what they wanted to be when they grew up today. So I think that's really important that we give the information and we trust young people that they will be okay, because I certainly didn't start out doing what I'm doing today, and life happens, right?
Great. Thank you very much. I think some really important things there. And I think it's a whole subject for a future conference, Lindsay. When you consider we have an education system that was arguably originally invented 140 years ago in the Victorian era, that is still certainly predicated on the fact that you will have one job and one career for life. And as you have said, we need an education system that will allow everybody to have this job at 20, a completely different job at 30, a completely different job again at 40. We're a long, long way from that. And I do have to say, the GCSE changes 1 to 9, if that is not a perfect example of completely unnecessary change, and I haven't got a clue whether 1 is good or 9 is good, I've just got my head around the GCSE level 2 stuff and all the rest of it. I don't know whether that's a 4 or a 5. I've no idea. And I just think, well, have we done that? Aren't there more important things in education to worry about than changing it from A to F to 1 to 9? Come on. Come on. That's probably kept a good few civil servants employed for about 4 years thinking that one through. But why have we done it? Completely unnecessary. Waste of time, instead of focusing on some of the really important issues. Go and enjoy your gin. Thank you very much indeed.
Think apprenticeship. Think pathway.